member Mirna Soto, founder and CEO, Apogee Executive Advisors, and currently sitting on the board of CMS Energy, Popular Bank, Spirit Airlines, and Trinet Group, Inc.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the opening panel. Our panel this afternoon is going to focus on global supply chains in this post-pandemic world. And I like to use the word post because I believe we're on our way to a post-pandemic world. I'd love to share a couple of facts around the global supply chain dilemma that we are currently experiencing. In recent surveys, 94% of Fortune 1000 companies have seen a supply chain disruption that has resulted as the recent pandemic. 75% of those companies have had a very negative or strongly negative impacts to their business as a result of it. 55% of companies plan or already have downgraded their growth projections and outlook due to supply chain issues. The global pandemic just upended the supply chains and operations with challenges no one could have predicted. The slowdowns and lack of demand are being followed by what may be an even greater challenge as our unprecedented growth post-pandemic, which will set to increase rapidly as consumers and businesses start spending following the pandemic. Some companies haven't survived, and more will continue to struggle to adapt. Even the best boardroom planning fell short when the global impact of our pandemic, combined with social upheavals, natural disasters, political challenges, caused the biggest disruption to social and economic life in the past 100 years, leaving boards with a pressing new issue. We hope to discuss that issue today and to provide some insights of what board members should be thinking about and should be asking about as it relates to our post-pandemic world and how we will be able to combat the supply chain issues that exist today. Today, we have a panel of experts, and I am honored to be sharing the stage with these experts who will be joining us to discuss trends and what boards need to know. Let me start by introducing each of the panelists, and then I'll ask them to come on stage and share a little bit more about their backgrounds. First off, we have LCDA member Alex Blanco, the former EVP and Chief Supply Chain Officer for Ecolab, and he now serves as the director on the board of Patterson Companies.
Thank you, Miriam.
We also have with us today Adriana Ibarra Fernandez, who is a partner with Baker McKenzie and specializes in foreign trade matters. And last but not least, we have LCDA member Luis Solana, who is the head of supply chain management for North America for the Henkel Corporation. Welcome, everyone. I would love an opportunity for each of you to introduce yourselves and to speak to your backgrounds to a degree as we open up this panel. Let's start with Alex, then Adriana, and then Luis.
Thanks, Mirna. It's a pleasure to be here. You know, I've been working in supply chains now for almost 40 years, and I'm fascinated by this topic because I think the answer is I retired at the right moment, because some of the challenges that my compatriots are facing right now are pretty challenging. So I'm looking forward to this conversation. So pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Adriana? Adriana, you're on mute.
Sorry for that. Thank you, Mirna. Common issue, the mute thing. I've been working on trade and customs matters for over 25 years now, and I think these are the most challenging times that we have faced. So Alex is saying that he's glad he doesn't have to face this any longer, or not for long. And but on the other side, this is a very interesting time to be doing work related to trade, customs, and supply chains. So glad to be here.
Excellent. Luis?
So I started working in supply chain when I was 10. So I have 3 years experience working in supply chain. All joking aside, I didn't have the luxury of Alex of retiring from managing supply chain in the recent past. I've been operating for large companies, regional, global supply chain functions over the last 25 so years. So happy to be here.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you all for that introduction. And let's get into the content. So one of you said you retired at the right time. The other just entered the space as a 10-year-old. There are more than enough lessons that we could talk about that many companies have learned through this pandemic as it relates to supply chain. And some may be brutally obvious to many. But I would love to hear from each of you if you would like to share what you believe, what are the core lessons learned that we've had during the pandemic related to supply chain. And what do you believe should be our approach to be much more resilient in this aspect in the future?
Do you want me to kick it off, Myrna? Is that okay?
Sure.
No, so look, here's what I think. I think that, we've got some learnings here. The pandemic was the triggering event for a lot of the problems that we're seeing on global supply chain, but it wasn't, there was a lot of underlying issues that were there. We know that we were having trouble with labor anyways. The supply chains were long, inventories were low. And so and as we went into the pandemic, some decisions that got made really kind of ended up making the situation worse. People laid people off, they shut down production, assuming that the volumes were going to be down. And on the contrary, what ended up happening is, we saw that a lot of things actually ramped up. We had a whole closet full of toilet paper, which we're not going to get into right now. But a lot of those kind of things happened, and as a result, we ran out of a lot of things. And so I think the learning there is you always need to be looking for the next risk or the next challenge, and really think through and really have resiliency built in. I'm not sure, a lot of people got used to having very reliable long supply chains, and maybe didn't really pay as much attention to the resiliency factors.
And I think that resilience has become the word of the pandemic. And by that, we mean a lot of things. But I think that nearshoring is something that we learned as something important in supply chains, and having alternatives. And I think that one of the challenges or the lessons is do not neglect compliance to be able to respond rapidly, because we saw many companies trying to gather or develop new sources of materials, and neglecting compliance or passing by all the know your supplier questionnaires and compliance related issues, and these cause problems. So I think that's one of the lessons. Do not neglect compliance just to be able to meet deadlines from your customers.
As I reflect on the last 2.5 years, at the end, as supply chain professionals, our job is just matching supply and demand. Simple as that, right? But things change. When suddenly demand dries and supply reacts, and suddenly demand quickly comes back up, supply chains are not able to react as fast, and that's what we're living today. In order to react, inventories get consumed, and it's just like lowering the water in a riverbed. So suddenly rocks appear that weren't there visible before, and now we're all dealing with that. So lessons from that is, a lot of conversation, I'm sure, in all companies about the right levels of inventory investment that you need to do, potential shortening or onshoring of supply chains, as Adriana was mentioning, and also thinking on, our suppliers' supply chains, because at least firsthand, I would say that if somebody takes my sleep away, is not only my supply chain, but my supplier's supply chain. So.
I love that analogy, the water in the river and then the rocks appear. That is just perfect for what we're discussing. And Louis, you mentioned something that was a perfect segue to my next question. When we think about all of the challenges that existed over the last 2 years, you all made very good points about the things that need to be considered. The fact of resiliency, and obviously resiliency will mean very different things to different industries. In your minds, thinking about being serving in boardrooms or presenting to boardrooms, what do you believe are the beginning of these conversations? What types of conversations should be happening in the boardroom about how to avoid the rocks, avoid the rocks in the river?
You, you want?
Please, Luis.
Okay. So when you talk about the boardroom, you need to talk the language, right? So let me just frame it in probably cost, cash, and service. So from the cost perspective, I think historically, as global supply chain leaders, we aim to optimize costs, reduce costs. By that, you outsource or offshore some stuff, and suddenly we realize that probably that's not as reliable when you're clogged on the ports and you have long lead supplies that need to react to faster changes on demand. So rethinking that. When you think about cash, it goes back to inventory. What is the right level of inventory you want to invest on to be able to just keep that water level a little higher, so you don't, even on a acceleration of demand, you don't see those rocks come above water level. And last but not least, all this is about what service you're willing to or you can provide to your customers. At the end, it's there's trade-offs to be made sometime on investments based on service levels, and I think those conversations, talking from the three angles, is important to have at the boardroom level. So.
Excellent. Alex, I have a question for you. As we prepared for this discussion, you shared some perspectives that I want to make sure our participants get a chance to hear. And we'll tee it up by asking you to share what are the types of pivots you've seen companies make in order to try to combat some of these supply chain issues.
We talked about it a little bit, but one of the things is nearshoring. I mean, at the end of the day, is supply chains are long, and then one of the things that we have to do, and we've come to rely on that, but the reality is the cost of a container from China has gone up 4 or 5, up to 10 times in some cases, and that's not even the biggest problem. The biggest problem is you've got 100 ships waiting off the coast of the port of Los Angeles or Oakland. And so all of these things kind of says is we should be looking for alternatives. And I do think that the word resilience is a good word. I think the other word we need to think about is agility. We need to be faster at responding to new data, and so and we need to kind of do scenario planning and say, okay, what if? So a lot of us, and I advise a couple of companies right now in terms of what they're doing in the supply chain crisis. When the business went down, they reacted very, very quickly to kind of downsize. And the question was, what was, if we had asked the question, what if it doesn't go down, what would we have done differently? Some other companies actually played some other games. They actually, invested in and assumed that the volumes were going to go up. I will say that, I've read an article recently that, Amazon is, spending like $4 billion in the next couple of years in terms of investing in their supply chain in order to have the flexibility to respond to some of these needs, air freighting products in order to deliver them on time. Not everybody can afford to do that. But I do think that those are things that need to happen. So anyways, I think that's what you were looking for.
Yeah, definitely. And I think there's also the opportunity to your point about having agility. I'd love to hear from all of you what you believe are those type of innovation opportunities that some organizations can consider. The historical, I'll use a strong term, legacy supply chain for certain organizations. We've seen some pivots where companies have basically said, I can't rely on that anymore. Let me try to meet my needs in a different way. Do any of you have any examples or experience that you'd like to share with our participants?
Well, I'll mention two real quick, and then I'll let Luisa or Adriana kind of jump in. But I'll talk an example that's not my direct example. We'll talk about Tesla, and we'll talk about how the chip shortage kind of basically stopped. There's a shortage of cars right now because there's no chips. Well, somehow or another, Tesla managed to ship their the last quarter, and the way they did that is they took newer chips, reprogrammed the firmware, and were able to leverage those new chips to do that. And so the issue of the supply chain is no longer just a supply chain problem. The R&D needs to be involved, the marketing needs to be involved, and a lot of people need to do substitutions and formulation changes in order to better meet that. it's the same word, but it's a different product. Silicones. Silicones are a problem for a lot of the beauty companies, and a lot of people are having to reformulate to different levels of silicones. And there's the issue in China with coal, which is the root cause to why we're ending with problems with silicone. And a lot of people are finding creative ways to work around that. And so, I think there's great examples out there of how companies are responding to it, but it requires a lot of flexibility, and you need to look at a holistic approach to do it.
Louis, any thoughts or insights?
Yeah, so I think Alex brought three very good examples. Probably just adding the perspective of at the end, every company wants to be, in order to compete in a very competitive market, they have to have uniqueness of their product or service, right? That sometimes evolves to a proxy of absolute differentiation on every component on the product. So, food for thought as supply chains need to evolve. Companies need to differentiate in what is core to their product, but there's things that they can leverage. Just being some level of commonality on not having the specific grade of raw material, just have a more common base on certain products, or in a certain sub process. If they're sourcing semi-finished goods from a different region, they might just post differentiate. One is localize the product in the market. So I think there's some tactical ways of trying to avoid that single sourcing or sole sourcing. Those two items. Historically, as a supply chain professional, we try to leverage the purchasing power by centralizing buying power with a handful of suppliers, and that the counter to that, if that supplier's supply chain struggles, if they catch us, if they sneeze, you catch a cold, right? So it's about, and that's what has happened to a lot of supply chains. So food for thought on that. I don't know that I have the secret, the magic potion to fix it, but it's food for thought and reflection. So
Yeah, I'm gonna turn the mic over to Adriana to opine on what we're discussing, but also I want to ask Adriana a very specific question. And based on your experience, we're very much looking forward to your insights. But what do you believe are the main opportunities that you're seeing for our global supply chains as it relates to international trade? Because there is so much discussion about our reliance, to Louis's point, on single sources and leveraging the economics of that. But I'd love to hear from you what you believe are kind of the opportunities that you envision.
Thank you, Mirna. And just to comment on what Luis was mentioning, I think this reshaping of products. So if you were normally shipping a raw material, develop it further before shipping it, or the other way around. That is something that started with the trade war between the US and China, where US companies had to reinvent or reshape their products to avoid shipping products from China and being subject to additional duties. And I think that was like a lesson that should have been learned as an opportunity, or as something that you can do to be able to agilely respond. No, and I think that one of the opportunities for companies is seeking nearshoring as an opportunity to develop suppliers and avoid the increasing costs that Alex was talking about, which in the last months have been increasing in crazy amounts. So that's an important opportunity, which can also open the door for taking the benefit of free trade agreements. So the fact that you manufacture or process components in a given country may open the door for benefiting from free trade agreements. And I'm based in Mexico. I negotiated free trade agreements more than 20 years ago, and since then I've been assisting clients on how to benefit from free trade agreements, and I have seen an increase in the use of free trade agreements as a result of nearshoring. No, processing goods in Mexico to export them to the US and Canada, which are our main markets, but also to Latin American countries or to Europe, has been something that companies have been focusing on recently.
Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing that. I think that sets the stage for many of the participants and members that serve in boardrooms to really push the envelope on rethinking the options. There is also another component here that I'm going to use your response and the insights you three have shared, is that the expense associated with supplies and the expense associated with what we've experienced in the last couple of years, some would say, is a precursor to shifting our optionality for suppliers, but in turn, changing the economic model for many, many goods and services.
Right.
What do you think companies, and when I say companies, I'm going to specifically speak of board members and how they're maybe guiding the strategy of a company, but what do you think they should be talking about as it relates to the consumer? Now, the consumer currently is experiencing a supply and demand issue, and there may be a tolerance for some increased pricing. But what about later? What are your thoughts? Alex, I'll start with you.
What did you say? What about later?
What about later on when prices now will be remarkably changed as a result to the option sets of our suppliers?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think everybody is taking advantage of the fact that you can take pricing, and there's an openness and a willingness to accept pricing now that wasn't there before. I think you're going to see it across the spectrum. And quite frankly, as companies won't survive unless they're able to take some pricing, because everything in their supply chain is really going up. You're right, it is a challenge, and the balance is going to be, I'll go back to the word that I used earlier, which is agility. And at some point or another, the price elasticity is going to, the rubber band is going to start stretching, and it's going to start to break. And the challenge will be to be able to predict at what point the rubber band's going to break. And look, competitive pressures are going to play out here, right? At some point or another, people are going to run out of cash, and at some point or another, people are going to start to making some hard choices. And the competitive forces in the market are going to result in companies competing. And so I think right now, what the game today is more of a game of having your products on shelf, right? The game that's going to happen here probably in another year will probably change to is, can you be on shelf and can you have a competitive price and a competitive product? Yeah. So I think things will change, but you need to be ready to respond to those market intelligences that you get, so that you can respond to that quickly and not get the bullwhip effect, and not overreact with pricing and then have to drop pricing too much and then you lose money, and so you have to go back again. So anyways, I think the key word is agility.
Yes, again,
yes.
Resiliency and agility. Louis.
I'll make a bill to Alex, because fast forward the movie, right? So if you increase the prices, and some companies might be going beyond just trying to recover the on cost of current raw material prices, but in past the time they haven't been able to pass prices, they might be going above and beyond. So what that happens, that's good for a while, right? And some companies might benefit from that in the short term. In the long term, two things will happen. The markets are very savvy, and the consumer is very savvy. So eventually, there will be someone developing a differentiated product or service that will be your competitor, low price entrant, that is going to eat on your market share. Or in a certain moment, the consumer is going to migrate to something different. How many of us have not done that? If you see a price increase on something you buy from Amazon, I've done it. So it's just I think the beauty about working, trying to match supply and demand, and working on a perfect market, or like the U.S. is that at the end there's nothing that lasts forever, and you just need to be thinking as a board member. You need to be thinking about the next wave, not the current wave.
Adriana, I would love your opinion based on both Alex and Louis's perspective. And I believe, what Louis said was, the consumer will then shift. Are you seeing anything related are you discussing this with your clients? What are the geopolitical kind of complications or opportunities as it relates to consumers? Any thoughts?
Well, yes, as I mentioned, the trade war between China and the US is a geopolitical issue that's still there. We thought it would change with the end of the Trump administration, but it hasn't. And the fact is that consumers have shifted from lower price goods manufactured in China to higher and maybe sometimes higher quality or different products based on availability and prices. No, so I think that's going to continue. I think that data analytics is strategic. That's something that the boards have to focus on to make decisions as to where to move or how to shift decisions. And from my hat of a trade lawyer, I have always to raise my hand and mention that shifts in suppliers have implications on the trade side. So maybe you shift a supplier, but then you're not entitled to reduce duties, and then that hits you.
Mhm.
Or there are regulations, import regulations that apply to a given country of origin that you have to consider. OFAC, country of origin sanctions, related sanctions have, to be, bear in mind, no, and anti-bribery, antitrust, and all these trade-related issues that sometimes are not really present on decision making by the boards. I think that have to come to play.
I think that is excellent insights, because you're absolutely right. It isn't always in front of mind, but you're absolutely right that those are significant implications. Alex, you wanted to add?
Yeah, I wanted to build on something, kind of going back and building on some of the things that Adriana was saying. One of the things that's going to happen here is really the strategy historically had been low wage rate countries, cheap logistics, and as a result, that gives you your lowest cost. What's happening now is logistics is no longer cheap, and the low wage rate countries are no longer low wage rate. And so we're going to have to localize. So, but on the other side of it, what you're seeing is we're localizing. So you have higher wages, but you can't even get people to work because the latest number I saw is we're short by about 80,000 truck drivers in the U.S. right now. And so what's the next thing? We're going to have to continue to work on cost. And then Luis knows this. At the end of the day, is we're not going to get away from that whole piece of it. So one of the implications will be automation. I told a story earlier to the team. I went to a relatively low cost restaurant here in Miami. And, they had a robot come into the table serving, I could order on it. It would deliver the food. The wait staff loved it because at the end of the day is it didn't take tips, and it helped them, with the work effort. And so, I really do believe that you're going to see a lot more of that. You're going to see cobots, you're going to see autonomous vehicles. And so I think what you're going to see is a whole new level of automation. And as a board member, you need to be not fighting yesterday's battle. You need to be fighting the future battle, right? And you need to be thinking about the strategy for the future. And so the question I'm asking on my board is okay, how are we getting ready for the future, and how are we planning for those trends that are coming, in 5 and 10 years?
Excellent points.
Just a bit to Alex's, it's so what to talk to the board about right now is most companies, one of the things that has benefit the companies is some investments on have reduced because you don't have the labor to do those investments, or even conservative decision made by the companies just trying to understand where the economy is going. But fast forward a little bit, and investments on either technology or automation, as Alex suggested, or investment also on finding the new normal on your inventory levels and your customers' inventory levels. So to the boards, why is this relevant? I think there might not be, and I agree with Alex, a supply chain professional will always, our job is part to optimize the cost. But the investments needed in the near horizon future might be more on capital investment, cash investment, whether in inventory or technology automation. So.
Yeah, I love that.
Another very relevant factor that has come to play is ESG. we cannot make any decision without thinking of ESG. No, it's another very very relevant word nowadays that boards need to consider, because you cannot make any decisions on shifting manufacture without thinking of ESG.
And that's a perfect segue. My next question was going to be exactly on that topic. What boards need to be thinking about as it relates to the supply chain from the ESG perspective, and in particular around human rights issues, right? So we talked a little bit about automation. Yes. We talked a bit about labor workforces and making decisions around suppliers. So Adriana, you've already kicked that off, that is a core component of what board members need to be thinking about, and will become and continue to become an area where institutional investors are going to be asking companies about what they are doing and what they're thinking about. Alex, any thoughts about the ESG agenda and what board should be bringing up?
Yeah, I mean, look, the good news and bad news is we're going to be spending a lot of money reinventing supply chains in the next 3 to 5 years. And when you're spending the money to reset your supply chain, it gives you the opportunity to design it from scratch and do it the right way. So we were locked in to a lot of supply situations that maybe weren't ideal, and maybe even generated some negative, ESG kind of implications. We have the opportunity now, and part of what the board needs to do is to ask the right questions when the investments come up, to make sure that the investments that we're making in creating the new supply chains really meet the future needs for not just for all the stakeholders, including the communities and our employees and the world that we live in. So I think necessity is the mother of invention. The good news is, we have an opportunity to fix it going forward.
Yeah. Louis, any thoughts?
No, I think Alex said it best than anyone here. If you're gonna, I think going forward, if I'm a board member, I will not only be asking for the ROI of the project. I will be asking for the ROI on ESG for the project. What does this do for my supply chain? Am I going to get the benefits aside from just the tangible investments on product or reduce labor, optimize labor? What does it do for the environment? What does it do for the full ESG componentry? So I think the bar for investment has been raised, and it's good. I think that's at the end. It's part of our social responsibility as leaders in organizations. So,
yeah. I call that. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
And younger generations are more focused and more worried about this. So it's even a marketing opportunity, no? I mean, the fact that you are, socially responsible, that you don't buy. I mean, it's even a requirement now for import, that you don't buy products manufactured with forced labor, that you are environmentally responsible. All those things, they have been incorporated into legislation of many countries, but even going, beyond setting the bar higher is a marketing opportunity, and especially for younger generations, I think.
I think you're absolutely right. I think it changes the social construct of the consumer, where they want to spend their dollars, how they spend their dollars, and what companies they will spend their dollars with.
Exactly.
I love Alex's comment. Necessity it just breeds invention, and it is the silver lining of what we are experiencing today. A difficult conversation to have in the boardroom, but having the opportunity to reinvent how we approach inventories, supply chain, and ultimately the delivery of our products and services is really the silver lining of what's happening today. One question I want to put out to the group. We've talked a lot about automation. We talked about different ways to source. We talked about nearshoring. Talk to me about, or tell me your thoughts about the need for more technology to provide those predictive analytics around our inventory curves. Louis, what are your thoughts?
So definitely, I see it from the context of how do you harvest the data that companies amass, right? A lot of companies just have the data and don't do anything with it. So you can move that data into analytics, and analytics into insight that you can transfer to the market. I think I would be putting investments on harvesting those data, converting the analytics, creating the right algorithms to really just try to create a more digital supply chain as you progress in the process. And digital supply chain might be a buzzword, but it's a reality. On you can have parallel worlds that you can optimize your supply chain. You can simulate. You can ideate different solutions, and at the end it provide one thing that I think we haven't talked about is definitely comes with investments is visibility. And nowadays visibility used to be kind of just I just want to know where my stuff is, and that was kind of a added value. Today is part of the solution, providing visibility where inventory is and where the goods are for anyone. None of us will be buying from the Amazon of the world. We didn't know where stuff is at any given time. So it's that visibility in your supply chain has become table stakes. So
I love being able to track my pizza delivery guy.
I will love that.
The comment that I was going to make on analytics is, you've got, descriptive analytics, you've got predictive analytics, and then really the next level is kind of a cognitive analytics and really giving you the capability to, you leverage AI to make decisions in real time to really optimize your supply chain. And so don't wait for stuff. Create the algorithms that are actually automatically resourcing and rejiggering the supply chain in live time. And so I do think that that whole world, and there's a whole group of people, data scientists and analytics, and that whole piece of it that is a burgeoning industry. We need to make sure that we leverage it the best it can, and it really is the bread and butter of future supply chains. It really has to be one of the places that we invest.
Great.
Adriana, any thoughts before I go to the next question? Okay.
No.
I was trying to read body language. You looked like you were leaning in. I wanted to make sure you had airtime. On that visibility comment, Luis, I did a little research and I read this recent report that McKinsey put out, and it's quite alarming. Based on their survey and the group of companies that they researched, only 2% of companies have visibility into their supply base beyond the second tier. 2%. So definitely it validates the need and the opportunity that exists. We have a few questions that have come in from the audience that I'd love to be able to make sure we try to answer. The first question is to the panel. What kind of consumer behaviors do you believe have shifted for good?
With all the Zoom meetings, people are buying more shirts and less pants. I think that's part of the ongoing. I do think that the online piece of it is going to be one of the key pieces, right? I do think that we accelerated the shift by 5 to 10 years probably, and the expectation now is that you're going to buy it all online, and so Amazon overtook FedEx as the largest package delivery service in North America, just recently, and so we're seeing that whole world is changing dramatically, and so I think those are behaviors that are inherent and are going to be part of it. I think that people using their homes as offices and leveraging that. I think that the reality is 100% of the people 100% of the time in the office is never going to happen again. And I think that there will be hybrid work. I don't think that it's going to be for everybody, but I do think that there's going to be hybrid work, and I think that's going to be a permanent fixture. And I think it's a good thing, quite frankly.
Yep.
Yeah. I think that trust in online shopping is something that increased in a good way. And even people that were hesitant to sharing information on their credit cards, or all people that didn't feel comfortable with online shopping, they had to do it because there was no option. And I don't think that we're going back to the way we acted before the pandemic after what happened.
Yeah, I'll just add one more, probably the commoditization of services. And what I mean by that is, forget about the time of taxis, but just Uber Lyft, right? Most of us will have an Uber app, but most of us also have a Lyft app. Most of us have an Uber Eat app, but we also have one of the other food service delivery services. So I think the commoditization of services is here to stay. I don't think it will go back ever again.
Yeah, and I definitely agree with all of you that it is a positive outcome to how the consumers have adopted some of these services. Of just a personal story, I used to think that Uber Eats, I'm like, that's never going to work, and of course, you should see my account; it's ridiculous. Um, another question from our participants. We've talked about this a little bit, but maybe we can expand upon it a little bit more. How does the employee shortage impact supply chain, and how are companies responding to attract employers to the workplace?
So I'll go if you want. So the employee shortage is I would say you need to peel the onion because not on every job in every part of the country, but definitely there's pockets of that. On those pockets, only the easy solution that most companies do is at the time is just try to be more competitive and the quick, where do I see it in the market based on my pay scale and benefits. But that only serves you short term. I think long term, we as employees, all of us have become more demanding and we want more flexibility in our time. It goes back to a hybrid work environment. It goes back to feeling part of, or that the purpose of the company I work for is meaningful to what we want to achieve and want to do and our beliefs. So I think the offering, it has become more complicated than just having a competitive salary benefits package. It's just and even younger generations, put a lot more weight in things that some of us didn't put weight on beforehand. So I think we just need to be cognizant of that going forward.
I think as a board member, I'll think about the role of of talent in a company. It's leadership is going to make a difference because people tend to quit their bosses, not necessarily their job as often. But I agree with Luis. At the end of the day, it's going to be a combination of things. It's going to be people are going to want to have good jobs where they feel that they're valued. And so I do think that inclusion and diversity are going to be important, and companies need to demonstrate that they're treating people with respect and they've got meaning and value in the work that they're doing. They need to be paid well, of course, but that's not enough. They need to have leaders that are treat them responsibly and don't yell at them and don't treat them poorly, and they need to have the flexibility. They need to have they're going to say, hey, I'm going to work from Colorado, and because the reality is my daughter's company, both my kids work out in San Francisco in tech, and my daughter, they all went to working from home, and they saw a 40% increase in productivity working from home. And so it's like you can't argue that working from home has hurt productivity. So originally there was a real push to get everybody back, but it's like do you really want to lose 40% productivity? So I think that's the world. So I think there's going to be a real challenge of competing for talent, and the good companies are going to find a way to get good hire, promote, and retain great talent.
Yes, and I believe that, the interest of the younger generations in well-being and work-life balance and flexibility are things that when I started working, I wouldn't even dare mentioning to my boss. And now it's something that you either respect or you lose talent, no? And I think it's a good change, no?
Excellent, excellent. There is one more question. It's actually more of a statement, but I want to give it its due and share it with the panelists and get a reaction. The statement is dealing with localization and the challenges of attracting and retaining labor, which we just discussed. This individual would like to see this as a potential trigger to change immigration policies in the U.S.
Amen.
To help employers access talent in neighboring countries. So I'm going to add to that and say we should be thinking about the international talent as another area of a supply chain. Any thoughts?
Could not agree more.
Yeah.
Me too.
So,
Could not agree
Absolutely.
more. We need to take advantage of labor, and we need to be flexible. And I'll speak as an American. What I'll say is that the United States was a country built on immigration, and it successfully did it. And I think we can continue to do it. And right now, quite frankly, is we need more people.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So
I
I
think
think it's a great point.
It's a great opportunity for us to look at the same type of diversifying our suppliers and diversifying our talent sources. And, we could probably have a whole other discussion on that topic. Well, let me close by thanking all of our panelists. Really appreciate your time, your perspectives, and being able to share your experiences with the group. I also want to thank LCDA for sponsoring this panel, and to the sponsors of this event. I want to thank you all very much for joining us today, and hopefully we've given you some great perspectives on supply chain and boardroom imperatives. Thank you.
Thank you.